Well, hello, Sarah Kesty, Executive Function Master.
Back at you, Seth Perler, also executive function master. How are you?
Good, good. Hello, parents, teachers, therapists, whoever's out there watching. We're going to talk today about advocacy. This is part two, so somewhere you can locate part one. But today, I think we were chatting a little bit before. You said that we were going to talk about how parents or teachers or whatever, but can use their own executive function to sort of walk through some of the processes around executive function. Is that what we're hitting on today?
Yeah, and just kind of how just a real quick primer on the difference between 504s and IEPs because it is alphabet soup around here. And so kind of empowering us with that information as baseline first. So do you want to start there?
Let's start there. First of all, I want to show this is the video that we did before. If you want to look for it on YouTube, it's called How to Advocate for Child Executive Function Support ADHD. And then there are some comments we may or may not have time to get into today because Sarah's got to leave in a few minutes. And but this is where it's at on YouTube, and then you can also find it on Sarah's podcast, the Executive Function Podcast. So let's go for it.
All right. So, um, you know, as parents, sometimes you hear a lot of jargon, and the school system really marries the legal system when we get into these special supports. So, give yourself grace. It's a little bit tricky. I have resources too at my website, iepomg.com, that I actually made flashcards for parents to learn the jargon because we can steal strategies from our kids, right? And flashcards are, unfortunately, one of the really effective ways to have active engagement with studying. So there you go. So, just real quick, the difference between 504 and IEP. A 504 plan is basically something that people might say levels the playing field. And what that means is it's akin to ADA laws, where it's like a ramp where there might be stairs so that you can access if you happen to be on wheels, or closed captioning for people who are hard of hearing, that kind of thing. So it's access focused, more along the lines of ADA. It can be accommodations like extra time to accommodate for, some of the processing issues we have when we have ADHD, trying to like manage that wild pony of attention. So things like that, not generally services. It's usually just a span of accommodations. And that can apply also to things like the ACT and AP exams, if you have that set as a 504 plan. 504 plans can happen anytime and they can go through college.
Okay, so let's break that down again. So we have IEPs and 504s. I hope that the view is working correctly on here. The last recording didn't work right. So we have IEP 504, and you just sum it up. So again, parents who are watching, you're watching this because your child has a disability. Now, whether or not you like the word disability, and Sarah and I both could talk for hours on that, we're not talking about that today. But if your child has a learning challenge, a learning disability, a learning difference, and they have a legitimate need for an accommodation, something to support their learning, then we have these options of IEP and 504. And can you just recap that real quick one more time?
Sure.
Just a
Yeah. So we talked
brief.
about 504, which is kind of like the ADA access, accommodations, that kind of thing. The contrast is an IEP, which is where you get services to specifically address some of the educationally related deficits associated with the disability. So that would be more like a resource teacher that checks in and maybe helps tutor a little bit at school, or a co-teach class where there's a special and a general educator just to make sure everybody's needs are met. Um, it's not necessarily true that an IEP trumps a 504, but generally it's more robust and it's under a different set of laws, the education laws more so than like the Rehabilitation Act laws. So there are a few more safeguards associated with an IEP.
Legally.
So, huh?
Legally.
Legally, yes. So, And really where your child qualifies is going to be based on educational impact. So if your kid just needs some extra time, maybe a copy of the teacher's notes, things like that that are kind of readily accessible and just within that reasonable accommodation, a 504 may be great. If your kid's like, woo, maybe needs some more time to like learn how to write, since those executive function deficits might be, impacting their ability to express all their really cool ideas, then an IEP may be helpful.
Can you have an IEP and a 504 at the same time?
Technically, yes, but it's super uncommon. So usually no.
Okay, and we're talking about sort of like the executive function, the process, and I know that you could keep going in that direction, but I'm going to change it a little bit, and I'm sure we'll cover everything we need to. But how does the parent decide? Do we go for the 504 and do we go for the IEP? Let's start right there.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know what? The school team's going to have some input too. So if you don't know, that's okay. I have a resource on IEPOMG that has like a whole show about kind of how to tell. But if you don't know, it's all right to just say, hey, I'm noticing some gaps. My child has a disability. Let's meet as a school team and explore from there. And if the school really feels that this is holding your child back academically, they will probably offer the IEP route, which does involve some assessment at school. So you're looking at 8 to 10 hours of your child being pulled out of class to do one-on-one assessments. Totally worth it if it results in, the services, but you be aware that that's kind of part of the deal. But if they're like, hey, we can provide these accommodations like extra time or a calculator for, non-arithmetic questions, things like that, great. That's fine too. So you don't, as a parent, necessarily need to know which one to ask for, but the key differential would be if you need direct services to sort of catch your kid up, you're leaning more towards an IEP.
And I don't even know how to ask. I guess part of me is hesitant to ask this because I know the, excuse my language, because I don't usually cuss on my channel, but the shit show that you may be headed for in diving into this process. So I was going to ask something like, would it be good strategically to like have an IEP until like senior year in high school and you can get a 504 so it follows them to college? But you and I know that realistically, like the logistics of making that happen are near impossible. But I do want to reiterate what Sarah said about college with the 504 following them to college. So that's something really to understand and contemplate as you're going through this process. So as parents are going through this process, Sarah, I'm sure a lot of parents out there are thinking this in their mind right now as they're watching us. But those who don't know this, something that you will want to know is that, Sarah and I have heard a million stories about parents who are trying to go through this process and there are roadblocks. So, and I want you to mention maybe a couple of these because we're talking about, again, sort of the executive function or the process that parents are going to need to take to get the ball rolling on this. And as you are dealing with this, I want you to anticipate the very real possibility that there are going to be roadblocks, that the school is going to be resistant, or some teachers will be resistant, or you'll hear different things from different staff members. It will be confusing. You can call somebody at the district office higher up. That is probably a good way to go. You can look at Sarah's work. Advocacy is not my specialty. And it is Sarah's, but there are ways to go. Don't give up, but there are. It's just not likely to be smooth sailing. There are people that don't know the laws, that don't know what's going on, that don't understand your kid, and it might feel like you have to jump through a million hoops. You might have to wait for a really long time to get the meeting with all the people to be there. Like that in and of itself, to get all the teachers' schedules lined up. The meeting may be really short, it may be 30 minutes, and then people spend 10 minutes saying, oh, hi, how are you doing? And how have you been? And what's going on? And you're just like, sorry, that bothers me too. Like when it comes to a precious amount of time about a kid, I want to get right into the important stuff. But so any sort of roadblocks or things that you would want people to anticipate as well that I left out?
Yeah, and can I just validate that's so true. I'm advocating right now for a high school junior whose school is like, oh, there's no problems, but they also conveniently left out some of the scores on the assessments that they, shared with us. So yeah, it is legitimately very tricky. Certainly, yes, I'll join you with the cussing. It is a shit show. And it's exhausting, right? And it's frustrating because as parents, we see there is a legitimate need. Like, I am my child's executive function at home. How is it that the school's like, oh no, everything's fine, you know? So I want to press pause on that for just a second and touch back to the IEP transition into college. We're going to talk about this in some of my summer college coaching, but what what we know is you can have an IEP through high school and then transition that IEP to a 504 in college.
Mm.
So it's not mutually exclusive. So you can stick with a 504 all the way through. Yeah, that might be a smidge more fluid of a transition, but you know what? We do the hard work anyway. So if your kid has an IEP, absolutely, there's still that option to go to. It might be called disability support services or some sort of iteration of that type of idea. Um, on campus, but every college campus has one. So that would be kind of a point person for you and your child, because advocacy looks different at different ages, right? Like around about sophomore year of high school, you're going to be co-advocating with your kid. But, I really encourage you to, as a strategy for roadblocks, think about the motto, nothing about me without me, and incorporate your kid. It's messy. It's painful sometimes to talk about like our vulnerable spaces, yet it is so important because, one of the pitfalls and the roadblocks that I can introduce right now is sometimes the adults, the well-meaning adults, get together and make this awesome plan. And guess what? The kid's like, oh, heck no, I'm not doing that in class. Or you really want me to use this? That's so embarrassing. And we forget that like teenage brains are hardwired to appreciate social, and that acceptance is so
Mm.
vital to their functioning that they're not going to be embracing of some of the more out there strategies, even if it's something that we think is very, that's fine. Just use this adaptive
And they don't
pencil
want to
or
look
whatever.
different from any of their
Yep.
peers. They don't want to stand out. Um, yeah, they don't want any sense of stigma.
100%. So, and you can expect some of the roadblocks to be that because executive dysfunction is invisible, a lot of people are going to assume effort.
Hmm. Say
And
that
that is
again, please.
incredibly frustrating. You might even notice it in your own brain too. Like, kid, you should, those should moments that are
Hmm.
real indicators that we've probably got a deficit there.
Yeah.
But the
Can
teachers will
I
do that.
expand upon that? Yeah.
Please
What
do.
Sarah's saying is, yeah, kid, you should be able to just blank. If you just try harder, you should be able to get this done on time. You should just be able to turn it in. You should be able to remember what your homework is. You should be able to write down your homework. You should be able to, manage your backpack. Those are sort of the things where, and I talk about the can't and the won't. We're talking about the same thing here. Is that a can't or a won't? When we assume it's a won't, that they won't do it, that's like the shoulding them. When we assume they can't, wow, maybe there's a reason they can't manage. And then, of course, we get into this statement that we hear so often, which is, I've seen you do it before. I know you can do it. Well, that's not the totality of the situation and the circumstances that are going on right now. Maybe they can cognitively handle the work, the type of work. That doesn't mean that they can handle the executive function, the very complex things that are going on behind the scenes to manage this thing. Anyhow, I didn't want to ramble and get off topic. We have about 5 minutes, but I did want to expand a little upon what Sarah was saying because it's so important, and that often the it can be the parents or the teachers. The teachers may not understand also that it's a can't. The teachers just think, well, your kid just needs to show up on time. Your kid just needs to come prepared to class. Your kid just needs to, you know, and I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Or study harder. Like, what does that even
study
mean?
harder,
How can
try
you do
harder.
harder, read harder? Like,
Mm.
what? Yeah. So, and we may ourselves find ourselves in that kind of like black and white thinking once in a while. So it's a challenge for us to rise above it and then recognize it in others. So that's part of the advocacy piece.
And
And
it
then
invalidates the legitimate needs. That's the
100%.
problem with this.
Right. And so
So if
you've
you as
got
the
to be able,
parent like feel like no, and you're sitting in the meeting and you're like, am I crazy? Like I know my kid's struggling with this, and there's 8 people in this room saying they just need to try harder. Listen to your gut,
oh,
parents.
Beautiful advice. Exactly. And, a couple things kind of to like, let's go the empowerment route, because I could definitely list all the blocks, but how about we just address them with strategies ahead of time? So, like I like to say, strategize the struggle. Um,
Okay,
don't
so
go
now we're
to
getting into strategize the struggle. So we kind of talked about like the different things you can anticipate, the IP, the 504, sort of the barriers that you're going to come into, and now we're going on to sort of another segment of our discombobulated but hopefully helpful video to you
our whirlwind advocacy adventure. Yeah. Well, and I think this is a little bit of a combination of the roadblocks, but I like to spin it in the like, let's preemptively address them. So, yes, you can expect pushback from schools. Oftentimes, ADHD and executive dysfunction is invisible. 2E, like twice exceptional learners, where they're highly gifted and intelligent children who also struggle with executive function, very new world for most educators. So you will find yourself doing double duty on educating the educators and advocating for your child. So give yourself grace and understand like that is a double duty job. You shouldn't have to do it. And yet here we are. So there's that kind of just perspective piece. Um, but in terms of strategies, plan to attend the meeting with at least one other set of ears with you. So that could be a partner, a spouse, a sister, a brother, a former teacher, whoever you feel is like kind of in your corner, because there will be a whole bunch of other adults there who may have differing perspectives, and you're not going to want to be alone. And we know highly emotional brains have a harder time accessing that prefrontal cortex, which means we're not going to remember as well, think as clearly. So, buddy up,
Yeah,
pad
and
your
I'll say real
schedule.
quick, I've sat
Yeah,
in with a lot of my families on the IEP meetings with them. So I'll go in sort of as their advocate. And I usually go in with an agenda. Just real quick for everybody, I'll jot down a few things that I want to make sure we cover. But I recommend that for parents too, with the emotional part that you're talking about, like that, having an agenda to keep yourself focused. And I would put at the top of your agenda to cut out the small talk, and
cute.
because you want to get right in, so you can literally say, hey everybody, I don't want to be rude, but I want to cut out the small talk, let's get to talking. I have an agenda here, but what's the agenda? So the second thing on your agenda, I would say, is to ask what's the agenda, and then just bullet out your two or three or four or five. I wouldn't go past five, like key things that you want to make sure are covered. And then go ahead, Sarah. I would,
Yeah,
should I say what I think?
go for it.
You're going to go over, what you're going to go over how to articulate the needs. And what Sarah's right about to talk to right now is that. But what I'm suggesting is when you write that list, you're going to want to articulate your three or four or five needs as succinctly as possible. But know that the way you articulate the need, and getting the need met is where I think a lot of challenges come in. And then there's post challenges that we'll talk about later. Like, does the teacher even read the IEP? And if they do they remember it when school has been going on for several months and stuff? Okay, go for it.
Right.
So
So that was a teaser for part three. So, and so I think we can do a couple more minutes. We're fine. We can be flexible. I'm going to give you a couple quick tips, and just to kind of make this process easier for you in terms of your own executive function and advocating for your child. So, pad your schedule. Give yourself a false deadline of maybe like 15 minutes early, just in case, and then an hour or two after the meeting opens, so that you're not having to quit early, because sometimes the meetings go late. Oftentimes the staff is pressured to make it happen quickly, but if you do have that opportunity to extend and really like get into the
excellent.
weeds and solve the problems, do it. I would also put in a couple calendar reminders, maybe 3, 4 days in advance, to do what Seth is talking about preparing your brain, just brain dump, get it all out. What are you worried about? What are you thankful for? And then curate what's worth bringing to the team at that moment and what could be put in an email. Talk with your kid. So many times we go into these meetings and forget that it's even for this human. So ask them, what's going right? What would be helpful if you
Mm-hmm.
had a magic wand? What would school look like? And sometimes they have the answers that would take us hours to figure out. right there. So make sure that that's an empowered part of your planning. And then I had one more. Oh, as a kind of follow up, and this is like, will kind of segue into our next section. And that is when you're done with the meeting, make sure you send a thank you email, but it's actually an accountability email and thank you clothing. So, this is what I mean. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the dedication. I heard you sharing that you will, and then you bullet out the action steps because that helps clarify, it concretizes, which is super helpful for executive function anyway. Plus, it gets it in writing. And that's part of the accountability piece that we'll talk about more next week. But it's just sort of like a good end cap to a meeting. It leaves a good taste of appreciation for the team because even if you disagree, hey, they brought their time and expertise to this meeting, and it may be a work in progress, but you're honoring the time that they spent. And also, you're saying, hey, remember that you said you would XYZ. And that helps make it much more realistic that the team will actually follow through in a timely manner, not have to rely on your executive function to prompt them through.
Excellent. And I would caution you to not write them a book in that email. So when you say, here are the things that you agreed to do, you can, if you want to write a book draft of it, but then the draft that you send, um, really make it, because your objective, you got to understand, teachers get a million emails. They got a lot of kids. They got a lot going on. They are overworked, underpaid, under resourced. So your objective is for them to read the important content in the email. That's to serve your child. That's the objective, not to cover every single detail. So really, when you can, like, bullet it or put numbers and say, here's the 3 main takeaways or the 5 main takeaways. Very, very short. Something where they could look at it and scan everything, but those 3 or 5 things, they can be like, okay, they can really soak it in. Again, they got a million emails in their inbox, so they're going to be scanning. They're not necessarily going to be deep diving into your email. So your objective is to get them to read it, and the longer it is, and the more it's a mono paragraph, the less likely they're going to see the key points. So just wanted to clarify that because I want you to get your kids' needs met.
Great idea. Yeah, you're always thinking from the user end. Like we used to call it dog fooding when we'd be lesson planning. So kind of like eat the food that you're serving to students, make sure that you're playing from the student end. Same idea when you email the school, right? Like what would this feel like to receive and how can I encapsulate it and really curate my ideas again so that they're um, very clear, very concise and actionable because ultimately that's what matters.
All right, cool. Thanks, Sarah. You can put it, if you're here on YouTube or on my website, you can go ahead and put comments below. We do read them, and we'll try to respond to them in our next version of this.
I think
Check out
so. We'll go a
Sarah's
little
website, the
longer.
Executive Function podcast, and my SethPerler.com. If you like this, give it a thumbs up. It helps the algorithmy thing. Comments, like, subscribe, blah, 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 all the things. But seriously, we serve and we hope that you appreciate it and support us by doing those things if you would and share our work. Sarah's
Absolutely.
amazing. So thanks for being here, Sarah. And I enjoy doing this with you.
Takes one to
And
know one, man. I know. I'm excited for part 3.
kindred spirits. All
Yep.
right, parents, teachers, therapists, everybody out there, thank you for helping kids. Have a great day. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.